And I can tell you that there is almost no area of human endeavor that Rob does not have an informed and well-reasoned opinion on, with the possible exception of graphic design. He cares tremendously about his patients. He's saved the lives of hundreds, probably, maybe more than that, of people with all manner of unusual infectious disease, and probably improved the lives of many thousands more. He's an exemplary father and husband, great citizen, and he's been honored with top doc awards many years running, as well as research grants, and is well published. He's a senior partner in Infectious Disease Associates of Atlanta. Am I saying that? Is that right? Close enough?
It's specialist in Atlanta.
Specialist, thank you. Which is the largest ID practice in the Southeast, which Rob basically built from scratch, attracting very high quality partners. He also founded Atlanta's Safe Passage Travel Clinic, which I'm a customer of when I go abroad. And he has kind of a keen eye for business that is not always there with physicians. When I returned home from my trip to Indonesia in January, I was greeted by the ice storm that all of us experienced, and so I was stranded at a MARTA station with no gloves, no winter coat. My wife couldn't come and get me, but Rob was ready for it. He had tire chains. He was out there ministering to his patients, and he took time away from his crushing workload to come and pick me up at the MARTA station and take me home. So that's the sort of friend and man that he is. And again, I could go on greatly, but I want to give Rob time to talk. So please welcome Rob Dretler.
Good morning. Mary's a tough act to follow. So I'm very flattered to again be following someone as important and ethical as Mary Norwood. And thank you, David. That was very kind. Well, you know, as David said, I'm a doc, and I've spent most of my life at the bedside, and so that's given me the privilege of seeing people in all variety of situations and somewhat extrapolating, because when someone's desperately ill or desperately terrified, sometimes of nothing, you get to see who they really are. You get somewhat a sense of humanity and how people are. And I think I've extrapolated a lot from that in the last 40 years. But I think for the purposes of this conference on leadership, I have 5 points I wanted to make. Of course, Mary's made them all already, but I'm going to just make them differently. So, a man is walking down the street, and he sees in New York City this young man dressed in a tie and a suit, very nicely dressed, with a violin case, and he is frantic. He is beside himself. He's looking at his watch, he's looking up at the lights, he's stepping out on the street to try to decide to see down the street, and is clearly very, very upset. He sees the man and goes up to him and says, Sir, can you help me? And the older man says, sure, well, what can I do for you? And he says, can you tell me, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the older man says, practice, my boy, practice. And really, that's my first point. No matter what you do, diligence is the #1 tool you have. You are only good at things you practice. Instant success, the old platitude, it takes about 20 years. And Malcolm Gladwell, who wrote the book The Tipping Point, talks about this. He talks about the Beatles. And in 1963, the Beatles were a okay, moderately talented band in England that had a small repertoire of their own and had various other songs they played, and they played pretty well. They then went to Frankfurt, Germany, which was the hip music scene in 1963. Yes, there was hip music in 1963. And they played 7 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day, and in that year and a half did about 10,000 hours of playing. In that time, they became a band that was totally melded, incredibly skilled, and had a huge repertoire. So in 1964, when Ed Sullivan said, hey, come on and play on my show, the dominant American really show for introducing anything at the time, they were ready and became superstars. And that's certainly been my own experience. When I first started in practice in 1983, AIDS had not even been named yet. We had in fact seen it, we hadn't known what we were seeing, but in retrospect, we started to recognize what these cases were. It had first been described in Bellevue, New York in 1981 with 5 cases of pneumocystis pneumonia. And we had not a clue, but you had all these young and middle-aged people desperately ill and dying quickly, and I was very quickly swamped, so that I was working 100 hours a week. I would get home, fall in bed, get up the next morning, and I really could never leave the hospital, because if I left, there was no one else to take care of these desperately ill people, and there was no template. I had to figure it out. There was no one to go to, no guidance to get. And I can't say honestly that had you told me beforehand, I would have chosen this. But in that 2 to 3 years, I got so much experience in so many illnesses that I got really fast and became able to recognize things that nobody else recognized very quickly, which has led to the broader career expanding and now having 4 and about to have 5 partners who are doing the work I was doing myself. But I get to have a life too now. So my first is diligence. If you are doing what you love to do, there still is a limit of how much you want to do it, but you have to put the time up front. If you do it over 20 years, doing a more leisurely pace, you're never going to be that good. It's got to be, all right, I am all in. I am totally committed to this, and I will spend whatever time it takes to do my absolute best job on every single case. And as I said, after a couple of years, if you're doing that, you get to be really fast and really good at recognizing it, because every case is somewhat different, but somewhat the same. The second is a theorem called Occam's razor. Occam's razor is a philosophical principle, and it's that the simplest answer is the best answer. And certainly that applies to medicine. And in my experience, that applies to most things. In medicine, I'm often surprised when a patient is sent to me with 2 or 3 different, unrelated coincidental diagnoses, because that never happens. Flat out. What I tell my residents and students, if you have 2 or 3 unrelated simultaneous diagnoses, then you have 3 or more wrong diagnoses. And if you can't tie everything together in a simple answer, that 1 leads to 2 leads to 3, you're down the wrong track. And that applies to everything. It's the old Rube Goldberg structures. You see that, people doing that all the time, and it never works well. The simplest answer is the best. In the philosophical principle, I heard a joke that described it well, is when Isaac Newton saw the apple fall from the tree, he did not decide in the hyper-religious age that he lived in that angels were trying to bring the apple up to God because he was hungry, and gremlins were pulling it down to hell for Satan, who was also hungry, and the gremlins were stronger. That objects attract made a much simpler and clearer explanation. So, sort of, whether, another platitude, keep it simple, stupid. Everything should tie together in a clear and simple logic.